Hello everyone, welcome to Learn DAX channel. My name is Siddesh and in this video we are going to study the concept of context transition in a calculated column. So before we move on to understanding how a context transition works in case of a calculated column, I just wanted to set some ground for it, and in order to do that I have taken this small example where we want to find the sales amount for a particular product in the products table. It just has 5 rows with product ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and having corresponding price and quantity. So if I have to operate in a row context, all I would simply do is come to the first row, check the corresponding price, which is 10, multiplied by the corresponding quantity, which is 2, and get the sales amount. Now, if I want to do this for the entire table, I'm going to come row by row, go to the second row, check the corresponding price, multiplied by the quantity, and I would get the output, and the similar thing will be performed for all the 5 rows, and I would get the sales amount for all the 5 rows. So that's what happens in case of a row context. So now what if there is a context transition that's happening, and what that actually translates to, and how does the calculation differ? So let's come to row 1. Now this case we are going to solve the same thing using a context transition. So now let's come to the first row. We have the product ID as 1, the price as 10, and quantity as 2. Now we are not going to directly multiply price into quantity. What's going to happen is the product ID 1, the price as 10, and the quantity as 2 is going to act as a filter. So this is going to be input for filtering the very same table, which is the product table. So if I filter this table and select product ID as 1, the resultant table that we get after filtering the input that we got after iterating the first row is going to be where we calculate the sales amount. So now in this case, we are left with a table and a set of values for which we want to calculate the sales amount. So that becomes is equal to price multiplied by quantity. So in the previous case, we were not filtering the table. We were going to the first row, checking the corresponding price and quantity for the first row, and then multiplying it to get the sales amount. Whereas in case of a context transition, we came to the first row, checked the corresponding product ID, quantity, and price. Now these three things became an input for the very same table, which acts as a filter. So we filtered that table using these three values, and the resultant table that we got, we used the rows, the corresponding values in that table having price and certain quantity. Then we did the product of these two values, which is price and quantity, and then we calculate the sales amount. So it's essentially like instead of going on a straight path, you just take a long turn and get to the same destination. Like instead of going straight, take a turn around it. So that's context transition. And now we will take an example in Power BI to understand how the output can differ with and without a context transition. So in this case, whether you use context transition or not, we are not really interested in knowing how the output is going to differ. Now let's come to the case of a calculated column. So I have two tables here, the products table and the sales table. In the sales table, there are 20 transactions that have happened, and there are 5 products corresponding to it. So what I want to do is I want to find out the sales amount for these particular products. Now there's going to be an interesting thing that we're going to observe when there is a filter context, or when there is a context transition that's going to happen, and when there is going to be no context transition that's going to happen, and how the output is going to differ. So first thing I'm going to do is I'll just create a new column, and the first sort of DAX formula that I'm going to write, you are all going to guess the output for it. So I'll just say sales amount is equal to sales price into sales quantity. Now the output is going to be fairly straightforward. We are a calculated column inherently has a row context active. So for each row, it is going to give us the corresponding sales amount. So for example, for the first row, the quantity is 2 and price is 800. So we are going to get 1600 as the output. For the row 2, the quantity is 3 and the price is 500. So 1500 is going to be the sales amount. So if I verify it, the first row it's 1600, the second row is 1500. For the third row, the quantity is 1 and the price is 150. So we get 150. So far so good. Now, what if I create a new calculated column and I write it sales amount sum x is equal to sum x sales quantity into sales price. Now, we know that sum x is an aggregator function even though there is a row context active inherently in case of a calculated column, but sum x is an aggregator. So even though we are going to go row by row, eventually the output that we get from this particular calculation is not going to be 1600 and 1500 and 150 and 1000. This is not the output that we're going to get. What we expect to see here is first, the row context operates, which inherently exists row by row, and then once it has done all of its calculation, it aggregates me one single number, and that value shows up in the whole of the table. And that's what ideally should happen. So if I hit enter, I get the output as 21,880, which is essentially the aggregation of the sales quantity multiplied by the sales price. So now an interesting thing is going to happen. What if I wrap this particular formula, which is sum x sales quantity into sales price in a calculate function? What do you think is going to happen? Should it give me the output that exists in this particular column, or should it give me the output as is presented in the sales amount sum x column? That's what we're going to find out, and that's the whole purpose of this video, that why are we studying context transition. So let's do one thing. Let's create another column. I will call it sales amount calculate is equal to calculate sum x. And before I proceed with this, I have to mention that calculate converts the row context into filter context, or it in that the context transition happens. So I will write sum x sales quantity into sales price. Now before I hit enter, I again want us to go back to that Excel sheet for this one little last time and just try to relate how the output that we are getting here is going to go back and relate to the calculated column that we are going to get in a Power BI. So in case of the context transition, when I came to the first row, I saw that the product ID is 1, the price is 10, the quantity is 2, and then it filtered this particular table for this particular product ID and only considered this as a part of the table. The rest of the table was non-existent at this time. There was only this one strip of line that existed. Product ID 1, price is 10 and quantity is 2. Now let's try to go back to Power BI and try to understand what is going to happen in this formula. So the sum x sales quantity into sales price is going to introduce a row context, which means we are going to go to the first row, check the quantity, check the price, and now the output is 1600 for the first row. But why? It's not directly going to be 1600. What's going to happen is I'm going to go to corresponding. Okay, this has revealed the answer. I'm just going to quickly delete this first. So what's going to happen in this case is the moment I write that function within a calculate, For the step one, this is going to be the table. When it's going to reiterate for the first time, this is the only part of the table that exists. So it is going to take the quantity, it is going to take the price and give me the output. Then during the second iteration, only the second row exists. It is going to take the quantity multiplied by price and then give me the output. So what this is going to do is I'll just clear all filters and I'll create the same thing again. So what's happening here is when I wrap that function sumx within a calculate, the row context, when it transitions into a filter context, I am getting a value for each row, and there is no aggregation that's happening like 21,880. But the the calculation that's happening is for each and every row. So for that reason, when I write this measure, oh sorry, calculated column sales amount calculate is equal to calculate sum x sales sales price into sales quantity. So because for each row that is going to get iterated is further going to filter the very same table, and there is only going to exist one row in that context and only going to give me the value for the first row, that is quantity of the first row multiplied by price of the first row. Then during the second iteration, the quantity of the second row multiplied by price of the second row. So I'm going to get the same output as that I've gotten in this particular column, which is the sales amount. So the moment I hit enter, we see magic. Well, not magic, context transition. So that's the difference. The moment you wrap this particular function around calculate, a context transition happens where a row context gets converted into filter context, and this is how the output differs when we operate just the sumx function or versus the calculate function which does the context transition. So we come to the end of this video with this demonstration, and I hope that you understood, even if slightly, the concept of context transition. I'll be very happy to know about your experience. And like I say, if you think that my interpretation of this particular concept or my demonstration needs further improvement so that I can improve myself further, then please leave your feedback and I'll be very happy to hear from you. And if you found this video helpful, I'll be very happy if you share it with your friends. And like I say at the end of every video, thanks for watching and happy learning.